I'm Amanda Wilson, 34, and the look on my brothers' faces was worth every second of the 3 years I spent keeping my father's secret. Sorry, sis, but the estate is ours now, they high-fived across our family's mahogany conference table. I quietly placed the leather folder on the table, watching their smug smiles. Actually, Dad sold everything to me years ago. The security cameras caught their faces when I revealed what else was on the footage. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe for the whole story. Growing up as Amanda Wilson meant living in the shadow of greatness. My father, James Wilson, wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He built Wilson Development Corporation from nothing but determination and an uncanny ability to see potential where others saw only decay. Starting with a single rundown apartment building in Chicago that he renovated himself on weekends, he gradually expanded until his portfolio included commercial properties across 5 states. By the time I was born, he was already a self-made millionaire with a reputation for integrity in a cutthroat industry. I was the 3rd child and only daughter. My brothers, Andrew and Michael, were 5 and 3 years older than me, respectively. From my earliest memories, I understood the hierarchy in our family. Andrew, the eldest at 39, had my father's height and commanding presence, but none of his work ethic. He'd been groomed as the heir apparent since childhood, given every advantage and excused from every failure. Michael, 37, was the charmer of the family, with an easy smile that got him out of trouble almost as quickly as he found it. Together, they formed a united front that left little room for me. Amanda, sweetie, the boys are discussing business with your father, my mother would say, ushering me away from the dinner table conversations. Why don't you help Maria in the kitchen? Maria, our housekeeper since before I was born, became my refuge. A warm, practical woman from Guatemala, she taught me Spanish while my brothers took sailing lessons and showed me how to make tamales while they were failing out of expensive boarding schools. Your father is a good man, Maria told me once, as what was right in front of him were 2 sons who saw his wealth as their birthright rather than something to be earned. I still remember the Christmas when Andrew was 16 and received a brand new sports car, which he promptly wrapped around a tree 2 weeks later while driving drunk. Father arranged for the incident to disappear from his record and bought him another car by New Year's. I took a different path. I worked hard in school, graduated valedictorian, and earned my own scholarship to Northwestern University. When I came home with my acceptance letter, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. That's nice, Amanda, he said absently. We'll need to get you a new wardrobe before you go. That evening, however, Maria slipped into my room with a small cake she'd baked and a card signed by the household staff. We are so proud of you, Nina, she whispered, hugging me tightly. Despite my father's emotional distance, I chose to major in business with a focus on real estate development. I wanted to understand his world. While my brothers partied through their 20s, burning through trust funds and collecting DUIs, I was interning at competing firms, learning the industry from the ground up. My mother's death from cancer when I was 24 changed everything. She had been the peacekeeper, the social director, the warm center of our family. Without her, my father retreated further into work, and my brothers increased their partying and spending. I moved back to the family estate to help manage the household and found myself increasingly involved in the family business as well. My brothers married within a year of each other. Andrew's wife Patricia was a former model with expensive tastes and a cold demeanor. Michael's wife Lauren was bubbly and seemingly sweet, but I quickly realized she saw my brother as her ticket to social status rather than a life partner. Both women treated me with thinly veiled condescension, referring to me as Little Amanda, even in professional settings. Don't you worry about these boring business discussions, Lauren would say, patting my hand at family dinners when I tried to contribute. The men will handle all that. What none of them realized was that my father had begun to see me differently. It started with small requests reviewing contracts, sitting in on meetings, handling negotiations with smaller clients. By my 30th birthday, I was effectively running several divisions of the company, though always behind the scenes and without the title or compensation to match. Your brothers need to feel important, my father explained when I finally confronted him about it. They're not like you, Amanda. They need the external validation. What my brothers needed, I thought but didn't say, was to grow up. Andrew had already driven 2 divisions of the company to the brink of bankruptcy with his poor decisions, requiring my father to step in and clean up the mess. Michael had developed a reputation among our business partners for missing meetings, making promises he couldn't keep, and expense accounts that seemed to consist primarily of strip clubs and gambling debts. I cleaned up their messes quietly, worked twice as hard, and watched as they took credit for my successes. When I did achieve something undeniably on my own, like securing the Henderson contract that doubled our commercial portfolio, my accomplishment was dismissed as luck or the client wanting to work with a woman. 3 years ago, my father received the diagnosis that would change everything: congestive heart failure. His doctor gave him 2 to 5 years, depending on how well he took care of himself. He told no one except me, swearing me to secrecy. Your brothers will start circling like vultures if they know, he said from his hospital bed after the first serious episode. I need time to put things in order. Looking at him then, his powerful frame suddenly diminished against the white hospital sheets, I realized 2 things simultaneously. My father was mortal, and he was afraid. Not of death, but of what would happen to his life's work once he was gone. The first conversation happened 3 days after my father was released from the hospital. It was nearly midnight, and I found him in his study, surrounded by file boxes and legal documents, a glass of scotch untouched at his elbow. Sit down, Amanda, he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. We need to talk about the future. For hours, he laid out his concerns. The company was more vulnerable than it appeared. Several major projects were at critical junctures. His reputation and relationships had smoothed over problems that would surface immediately under new leadership. Andrew and Michael, he said, rubbing his eyes tiredly, they think business is about showing up for the ribbon cuttings and taking clients to dinner. They don't understand the work. I sat quietly, listening to my father articulate what I had known for years. When he finally fell silent, I asked the question that hung between us. What do you want to do about it? His plan was both elegant and shocking. Over the next several months, he would legally sell me the entire business, the family estate, and all major assets for a nominal amount. On paper, he would be divesting himself of his empire, but in reality, he would be ensuring its survival. They'll fight it, of course, he said, already anticipating my brother's reactions. But Samuel has assured me the arrangement will be ironclad if we do it correctly. Samuel Thompson had been our family attorney. Still, I hesitated. It feels dishonest, I admitted. They're expecting to inherit everything. My father's face hardened. And what would they do with it? Sell it off piece by piece to fund their lifestyles? Fire loyal employees who've been with me for decades? Destroy everything I've built? He shook his head firmly. They haven't earned it, Amanda. You have. Over the next week, I struggled with my conscience. Was I betraying my brothers by agreeing to this plan? Was I taking advantage of my father's illness and vulnerability? But each time I visited the office and saw Andrew belittling his assistant or Michael taking 3-hour lunches while deadlines approached, my resolve strengthened. One evening, I found my father. I failed them, he said quietly as I sat beside him. I gave them everything except what they actually needed. Boundaries. Consequences. The chance to earn their own way. He turned to me, his eyes tired but clear. I won't fail you too, Amanda. And I won't fail the people who depend on this company for their livelihoods. The next morning, I agreed to his plan. The process took nearly 6 months. Samuel created a labyrinth of legal documentation, trusts, and holding companies. Everything was done by the book, with independent appraisals, proper tax filings, and meticulous attention to detail. Your brothers will look for any weakness, any technicality, Samuel warned as we reviewed the documents. We're making this challenge-proof. As part of the documentation, my father compiled a comprehensive record of my brother's business failures and financial irresponsibility. There were the vacation homes purchased without board approval using company funds, the hiring of unqualified friends for key positions, the sexual harassment settlements quietly paid to former assistants, the hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowed from company accounts and never repaid. Insurance, my father called it grimly, in case they try to claim I wasn't of sound mind when I made these decisions. On a crisp autumn morning, we gathered in Samuel's office for the final signatures. My father, thinner now but determined, signed document after document with a steady hand. I signed beside him, the weight of what we were doing settling over me like a heavy cloak. It's done, Samuel said finally, gathering the papers. Legally, Amanda now owns Wilson Development Corporation, the family estate, and all associated holdings. My father nodded. The waiting was harder than I expected. My father's health declined steadily over the next 2 years. There were good days when he came into the office and seemed almost like his old self, and bad days when he could barely leave his bed. Through it all, we maintained the illusion that nothing had changed. My brothers continued their entitled behavior, unaware that they were essentially employees in a company owned by their little sister. They're going to hate you when they find out, my father said during one of his hospital stays after a particularly bad episode. I know, I replied, adjusting his pillows. I can live with that. He took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Promise me you won't tell them until you have to. Until after I'm gone. I don't want my last days filled with their tantrums and legal threats. I promised. On a rainy Tuesday morning in April, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was at his bedside. My brothers arrived 2 hours later, already arguing about who would get his vintage car collection. At the funeral, Andrew and Michael put on a good show of grieving sons, accepting condolences from business associates and friends with appropriately somber expressions. I stood slightly apart, my genuine grief private and unwitnessed. Don't worry about a thing, Sis Michael said, slinging an arm around my shoulders at the reception. We'll take care of everything now. I nodded and said nothing, my father's secret heavy in my chest. The morning after the funeral, Andrew and Michael arrived at the company headquarters together, earlier than I had ever seen either of them at the office. I watched from my father's old office, which I had been using for months during his illness, as they strode through the reception area, nodding condescendingly to staff who had worked there for decades. By noon, security had been instructed to confiscate my access badge and escort me from the building if I caused problems. It's nothing personal, Amanda, Michael explained when I confronted him, his voice oozing false sympathy. We just think it's best if you take some time off. Grief can make people irrational. Andrew was less diplomatic. Let's be real, he said, not bothering to look up from his phone. You were Dad's little helper, but the company needs real leadership now. Why don't you focus on planning that charity gala Mom always organized? That seems more your speed. I left without argument, already formulating my plan. For the next few weeks, I played the part they expected the dutiful daughter, seemingly accepting of her diminished role. I attended the meetings they deigned to invite me to, nodded at their increasingly outlandish plans for the company, and pretended not to notice when they began clearing out my office. We're converting it to a wellness room, Lauren explained, supervising as workers removed my awards and professional certificates from the walls. You know, for meditation and yoga. It's so important for office morale. What they didn't know was that I had copies of every document, access to every account, and the legal authority they thought was theirs. I watched in silent horror as they began dismantling my father's legacy piece by piece. First came the layoffs. Loyal employees who had been with the company for decades were dismissed without ceremony, their positions filled by friends of my brother's who had no experience in real estate development. Cutting the dead weight, Andrew explained at a board meeting, pointing to a PowerPoint slide prepared by his new efficiency consultant, a former college roommate whose previous job had been managing a golf pro shop. Next came the fire sale of assets. Properties my father had carefully acquired and developed were listed well below market value for quick cash. The historic Lakeside Plaza, which my father had restored from near-condemned status to a thriving mixed-use development, was sold to a strip mall developer for 60 cents on the dollar. Liquidity is king, Michael announced, already eyeing a new yacht with the proceeds. The final straw came when I overheard them discussing the family estate during what they thought was a private lunch on the company terrace. The place is a money pit, Andrew was saying, cutting into his steak. Property taxes alone are killing us. I say we sell to that hotel developer and split the cash. What about Amanda? Lauren asked, twirling her wine glass. She still lives there. Michael shrugged. She can find an apartment like a big girl. It's not like she contributes anything to this family. Patricia laughed, a cold sound like breaking glass. Besides, who needs 3 acres in the city anymore? So tacky. Andrew and I have our eye on that penthouse downtown. I slipped away, my hand shaking as I texted my friend Jessica to meet me for coffee. Jessica had been my roommate in college and was now a successful marketing executive. Unlike many people in my life, she had no connection to my family money or business, and I trusted her completely. They're going to destroy everything, I told her, fighting back tears in the corner of a quiet cafe. Not just the business, but our home, the foundation, all of it. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. So stop them. I'm not sure I can, I admitted. The confrontation. It's going to be ugly. Amanda, Jessica said firmly, your father trusted you with his legacy for a reason. He knew you were strong enough to handle this. That evening, I received an email from Michael's assistant, his third in as many weeks, informing me that a final inheritance meeting had been scheduled for the following month. The email mentioned that I should be prepared to sign documents transferring my minor shares in certain family holdings and vacating the estate within 30 days. I forwarded the email to Samuel Thompson with a single line, "It's time." His response came within minutes. "I'll start preparing the documentation." Are you ready for this? No, I thought. But I didn't have a choice anymore. The next day, I discovered something that hardened my resolve beyond any lingering doubt. While reviewing the company financial records that I still had legal access to, I found evidence that my brothers had been embezzling from the company for years, even while my father was alive. Fake vendor accounts, inflated expense reports, consulting fees to shell companies they controlled. The pattern was clear and damning. This wasn't just about preserving my father's legacy anymore. It was about justice. The cameras need to be undetectable, I explained to Trevor, the security consultant Samuel had recommended. They can't know they're being recorded. Trevor, a former military intelligence officer with kind eyes that contrasted with his imposing physical presence, nodded as he surveyed the family conference room. We can place micro cameras in the light fixtures, air vents, and bookshelf decorations. They'll capture every angle. And they're legal? I asked, chewing my lip. In your own property? Absolutely, he confirmed. Especially with notices posted at all entrances stating that security monitoring is in use on the premises. Over the next 3 weeks, Trevor's team installed state-of-the-art surveillance throughout the office building and the main house of the estate. I made sure the work happened during nights and weekends when my brothers were busy with their social obligations. Meanwhile, I met with Rachel Goldman, an attorney Samuel had recommended as additional counsel. Where Samuel was old school and methodical, Rachel was sharp-edged and tech-savvy, with a reputation for handling complex corporate disputes. The documentation is impeccable, she assured me after reviewing everything. Your father and Samuel did an excellent job making this airtight. The transfer of ownership was completely legal and properly executed. Will it be enough? I asked. Rachel's smile was wolfish. With the evidence of embezzlement? More than enough. They won't just lose their inheritance claims, Amanda. They could face criminal charges. That possibility gave me pause. Despite everything, these were still my brothers. We had shared a childhood, however unequal our positions had been. I don't necessarily want them in jail, I admitted. I just want to protect what's mine. We can use the threat of criminal charges as leverage, Rachel suggested. But ultimately, that decision will be yours to make. As the day of the meeting approached, my anxiety increased. I found myself unable to sleep, pacing the halls of the family home at night, touching the familiar objects and wondering if this would be the last time I would see my brothers in these rooms. Maria found me like this one night, sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m, clutching a cup of cold tea. "Nina," she said softly, taking the seat across from me. "You are carrying too much alone." The kindness in her voice broke something in me, and I found myself telling her everything: the secret arrangement with my father, my brother's plans, the upcoming confrontation. When I finished, Maria reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "Your father knew what he was doing when he chose you," she said firmly. "I have watched those boys their whole lives. They take. You build. Like your father." She rose and kissed the top of my head, just as she had when I was a child. "Be strong, Amanda. Your father is watching, and he is proud." The next day, I reviewed the security footage that had already been captured. There was Andrew, instructing the new CFO to backdate documents to cover the missing funds. There was Michael, meeting with the potential buyer for the estate, promising a quick, below-market sale if they could expedite the commission. Most damning was a conversation between my brothers in what they thought was the privacy of Andrew's office. "Once we liquidate enough assets, we can force her out completely," Andrew was saying, pouring himself a generous scotch. "The lawyers say if we control the main holding company, we can dissolve her position." "What about her shares?" Michael asked. Andrew laughed. "The shares Dad gave her are in the smaller subsidiaries, practically worthless on their own. She has no idea." But I did know. I knew everything. The night before the meeting, I laid out my outfit with care: a charcoal gray suit that had been tailored to perfection, understated pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, and the watch my father had given me on my 30th birthday. "For the time that is coming," he had said cryptically as I unwrapped it. Now I understood what he had meant. Sleep eluded me that night. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would reveal the truth, trying to anticipate every possible reaction from my brothers. Would they threaten me? Try to physically intimidate me? Break down completely? I needed to be prepared for anything. At dawn, I gave up on sleep and went to my father's study. My study now. I sat in his chair, running my fingers over the worn leather of the armrests, and whispered, "I hope I'm doing this right, Dad." For a moment, in the quiet of the early morning, I could almost hear his reply, "You are." "Everything's operational," he confirmed. "Audio and video are feeding directly to secure servers. Even if they discover and destroy the cameras, we'll have the footage." "And the security team?" "On standby. One text from you, and they'll enter immediately." I nodded, straightening the files on the table for the 10th time. "Thank you, Trevor. For everything." He gave me a respectful nod. "Your father was good to my family when we needed it most. This is the least I can do." At precisely 10 o'clock, the doors opened. Andrew entered first, his 6'2" frame expensively dressed in a custom suit, followed closely by Patricia in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Michael and Lauren came next, both sporting the deep tans of people who had recently returned from a vacation they couldn't afford. Behind them trailed their respective attorneys and financial advisors, a total of 6 men in nearly identical suits. No one bothered to shake my hand. "Let's get this started," Andrew said, taking the seat at the head of the table, our father's traditional place. "Some of us have actual business to attend to today." I remained standing, watching as they arranged themselves around the table, their body language making it clear I was an afterthought in this process. When everyone was seated, Michael's new assistant distributed folders to everyone except me. These contain the transfer documents for Amanda's consideration, Michael explained to the room, as if I weren't present. We're prepared to be generous here. Monthly stipend, continued residence in the guest house for a transitional period, nominal board position with the foundation. Assuming the foundation, Andrew shot her a warning look before turning to me with a practiced expression of fraternal concern. Amanda, we know this is emotional for you. You were always Dad's favorite, and letting go of that connection will be difficult. But this is what's best for the company. Lauren nodded enthusiastically. Plus, think of all the free time you'll have. You could finally meet someone, start a family. 34 isn't too late, but the clock is ticking. The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral as I finally took my seat not at the far end where they had placed a chair for me, but directly across from Andrew. Before we proceed, I said calmly, I'd like to clarify something. What exactly do you think is happening today? Andrew exchanged an amused glance with his attorney. We're finalizing the inheritance distribution, of course. As Dad's primary heirs and the new controlling partners of Wilson Development, Michael and I are outlining the terms of your minor inheritance. I see, I said, nodding thoughtfully. And these terms include me vacating my home within 30 days? The estate requires significant updating before we can consider selling, Michael explained slowly, as if to a child. The property developers need vacant possession to properly assess the value. And my position with the company? Will be properly compensated, Andrew assured me, his patience clearly wearing thin. Look, Amanda, I know you enjoyed playing businesswoman while Dad was sick, but this is reality now. The company needs experienced leadership. Experienced leadership, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Like the kind that sold Lakeside Plaza at a 40% loss? Or the kind that fired Thomas Jenkins after 30 years of service to hire your former fraternity brother who has been arrested twice for insider trading? The room grew uncomfortably silent. Andrew's jaw tightened. Our business decisions are not up for debate with you. Now, if you're ready to sign the documents, we can all get on with our day. I smiled then, reaching for my leather portfolio. Actually, I have some documents of my own to share. With deliberate slowness, I removed the first set of papers and slid them across the table to Andrew. These are the transfer of ownership documents executed between James Wilson and Amanda Wilson 2 years ago, transferring complete ownership of Wilson Development Corporation to me. Michael laughed uncertainly. What is this, some kind of joke? Next, I continued, pulling out another document, is the deed to the family estate, legally transferred to me 18 months ago. Andrew was scanning the papers now, his face growing increasingly pale. These are forgeries, he sputtered. Dad would never do this. And finally, I said, ignoring him, documentation of the trusts and holding companies that now legally control all former Wilson family assets, with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. The attorneys were whispering urgently to my brothers now, examining the documents with growing concern. Lauren looked confused, while Patricia's eyes had narrowed to dangerous slits. This is preposterous, Andrew finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table. Dad was sick. You manipulated him. No court in the country will uphold this. This theft. I had anticipated this reaction. Calmly, I played my next card. Samuel Thompson has prepared affidavits from Dad's doctors confirming he was of sound mind when these decisions were made. We also have video recordings of Dad explicitly stating his wishes and reasoning. Which were what, exactly? Michael demanded, his charm evaporating into raw anger. That you would destroy his life's work, I said simply. That you lacked the judgment, work ethic, and integrity to lead the company. That you saw his legacy as nothing more than your personal ATM. Andrew stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. You manipulative little bitch. You think you can steal our birthright and get away with it? We'll fight this with every lawyer in the country if we have to. I remained seated, my voice steady. You're welcome to try. But before you do, there's something else you should see. I pressed a button on my phone, and the large screen on the wall came to life, displaying security footage from the previous week. There was Andrew, clearly instructing the CFO to falsify financial reports. There was Michael, accepting an envelope of cash from a contractor who had mysteriously won every bid he submitted in the past month. There they both were, discussing how to siphon money from the company before the inheritance mess was settled. What the fuck is this? Andrew hissed. You've been spying on us? I've been protecting my company, I corrected him. The company I legally own, in my buildings, which I also legally own. The attorneys were packing their briefcases now, muttering about needing to review the situation. Patricia and Lauren sat frozen, the implications of what was happening slowly dawning on them. You won't get away with this, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. I already have, I replied, standing at last. You have two options now. Option 1, you fight me in court, where this evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and corruption will become public record. You'll lose, you'll be humiliated, and you'll likely face criminal charges. I let that sink in before continuing. Andrew's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This isn't over, Amanda. Actually, it is, I said, gathering my documents. Security will escort you from the building now. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings, after which your access will be permanently revoked. As if on cue, Trevor entered with 2 security guards. The timing was perfect. I had texted him under the table when Andrew stood up aggressively. This is our company, Michael shouted as the security team approached. You can't throw us out. It's my company, I corrected him quietly. It always was. You just didn't know it. As they were led from the room, their protests echoing down the hallway, I remained at the conference table alone. The confrontation I had dreaded for years was over, and the relief I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for what our family had become, for what my brothers had chosen to be, and for what my father had been forced to do. I looked up at the portrait of my father that hung on the wall, his expression serious, but his eyes kind. It's done, Dad, I whispered. Just like you wanted. The 48 hours my brothers had to collect their belongings came and went. Andrew sent his assistant to clean out his office, unwilling to face me or the employees who now knew the truth. Michael appeared briefly, charm replaced by cold fury as he filled boxes with the trappings of his pretend executive life. You'll regret this, he said as security watched him load the last box into his sports car. Family is supposed to mean something. It does mean something, I replied. That's why this hurts so much. True to form, they didn't accept defeat gracefully. Within a week, I was served with papers contesting the transfer of ownership, claiming undue influence, and my father's diminished capacity. Samuel had anticipated this and was prepared. Let them waste their money, he advised when I called him, concern evident in my voice. The documentation is bulletproof, and their credibility is non-existent. What I hadn't anticipated was the media interest. Someone I suspected, Patricia, had leaked the story to the business press, hoping public opinion would pressure me into a settlement. The headline in the Financial Times was particularly cutting: Daughter disinherits brothers in Wilson development coup. The article painted me as a manipulative opportunist who had taken advantage of my father's illness to seize control. It quoted sources close to the family, describing me as unstable, vindictive, and unqualified. I was in my office reviewing architectural plans for a new development when Jessica called, her voice tight with anger. Have you seen the article? I've seen it, I confirmed, trying to sound calmer than I felt. It's character assassination. You need to respond, Amanda. Tell your side of the story. I sighed, setting down my pen. And get into a public mudslinging match with my own brothers? That helps no one, least of all the company. Then what's your plan? She demanded. To do exactly what my father trusted me to do, I said firmly. Run this company with integrity. The truth will speak for itself eventually. That evening, as I returned to the now quiet family estate, I found Maria waiting for me in the kitchen, a glass of wine and a plate of food ready. You did not eat today, she said, gesturing to the chair. Sit. Starving yourself won't solve anything. As I picked at the food, she watched me with the same concerned expression she'd had when I was a child refusing vegetables. The staff is worried about you, she said finally. You work all hours, you barely sleep. This victory should not destroy you, Nina. Her words hit home. I had won the battle but was in danger of losing myself in the process. I don't know how to do this, Maria, I admitted. Everyone is watching, waiting for me to fail. So, she challenged, let them watch. Show them what James Wilson's daughter can do. The legal challenges dragged on for months. My brothers hired increasingly aggressive attorneys who attempted to depose everyone from my father's doctors to his golf partners. Through it all, I focused on stabilizing the company, reaching out personally to clients who had been neglected under my brother's brief tenure, and reassuring employees about the future. I rehired Thomas Jenkins and several other experienced staff members who had been wrongfully terminated. I halted the fire sale of properties, refinanced where necessary, and implemented a strategic growth plan that had been sitting in my drawer for years. 6 months after the confrontation, the judge dismissed my brother's case with prejudice, citing the overwhelming evidence that my father had been of sound mind and that the transfers had been legally executed. The ruling was clear: Wilson Development Corporation and all associated assets legally belonged to me. The decision came with an unexpected consequence. The evidence of embezzlement and fraud that had been submitted as part of my defense caught the attention of the district attorney's office. A week after the ruling, I received a call from a prosecutor asking if I intended to press criminal charges against Andrew and Michael. The question kept me awake that night. Did I want my brothers to face criminal charges? To potentially go to prison? Despite everything, the thought made me physically ill. I called Rachel Goldman the next morning. We have options, she assured me. The DA is willing to consider a settlement if they make full restitution and accept certain conditions. After careful consideration, I made my decision. I would not press charges if my brothers repaid every dollar they had stolen, resigned from all industry positions, and agreed to never contest any aspect of my ownership again. It was mercy they didn't deserve, but it was mercy I needed to give for my own peace of mind, if nothing else. Andrew refused initially, his pride unable to accept the humiliation of defeat. Michael, more pragmatic and already seeing his marriage to Lauren crumbling under financial strain, accepted the terms immediately. I wasn't the one who pushed for all. You're a grown man, Michael, I replied, unmoved by his attempt to shift blame. You made your choices. When news of Andrew's continued refusal reached Patricia, she finally showed her true colors. She filed for divorce the next day, unwilling to be married to a man whose financial future was now uncertain. Faced with losing both his inheritance and his trophy wife, Andrew finally capitulated and signed the settlement agreement. The public aspects of the family drama gradually faded from the business press as Wilson Development's strong performance under my leadership became the more interesting story. The company's stock price, which had plummeted during my brother's brief control, rebounded and then surpassed its previous high. Our reputation for ethical business practices and innovative development attracted new investors and partners. Throughout this period, I maintained a wall of privacy around my personal life. I declined all interview requests and kept a low profile at industry events. The work would speak for itself, that was what mattered. Surprisingly, some family members who had initially taken my brother's side began to reach out. My Aunt Sophia, my father's sister who had initially been shocked by the arrangement, called me after reading about a community development project we had launched in an underserved neighborhood. James would be proud, she said simply. I didn't understand before, but I do now. Even some of the household staff who had left when the scandal broke asked to return, including my father's longtime driver, George, who had known me since I was born. "This is where I belong," he said when I welcomed him back. Serving the Wilson family, the real Wilson family. As the one-year anniversary of my father's death approached, I found myself in a position I had never expected, firmly in control of a thriving company, respected by industry peers, and slowly healing from the family trauma. But the victory came with isolation. My brothers and their wives were completely cut from my life. Family holidays and celebrations were now quiet, solitary affairs. "You need more balance," Jessica insisted during one of our rare dinner catch-ups. "All you do is work." She wasn't wrong. I had thrown myself into the company as a way to avoid dealing with the emotional fallout of everything that had happened. The family estate, once filled with voices and activity, now echoed with my solitary footsteps. "Maybe it's time to sell this place," I mused, looking around at the grand dining room where we sat. "Start fresh somewhere new." Jessica shook her head firmly. "This is your home, Amanda. Don't let what happened make you give up your heritage. Maybe it just needs new memories." New memories. The idea took root, and I began to consider how to transform the estate from a monument to the past into something that reflected my values and vision for the future. 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, I stood in the garden of the family estate, watching as children from the local community center explored the newly installed playground equipment. The Wilson Family Foundation, reimagined and restructured under my leadership, had launched a program providing educational enrichment and safe recreation spaces for children from underserved neighborhoods. "Ms. Wilson," called out 8-year-old Jasmine, waving frantically from the top of the slide. "Watch me." I smiled and waved back, my heart lifting at her obvious joy. This was what the estate should be, not a fortress of privilege, but a resource for the community my father had built his business in. The past year had been one of profound transformation, both for Wilson Development and for me personally. The company had not only stabilized but thrived under my leadership. We had recommitted to my father's original vision of responsible development that served communities rather than exploiting them. The legal battles were finally, truly over. Andrew, faced with mounting debts after his divorce from Patricia, had left the country to live in Europe, reportedly working for a distant cousin's small investment firm. Michael had surprised everyone by showing signs of genuine remorse and growth. After his divorce from Lauren, he had sought treatment for alcohol dependency and begun rebuilding his life from scratch. 3 months ago, he had reached out with a handwritten letter. "Amanda, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now why Dad made the choice he did. You were always the one who cared about his legacy, not just the money it represented. I'm trying to become someone he wouldn't be ashamed of, even if it's too late. Take care of yourself. Michael." I hadn't responded immediately, unsure if I was ready to open that door again. But last week, I had finally sent a short email inviting him to coffee. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a first step towards something that might eventually heal. Professionally, I had finally stepped fully into the role my father had prepared me for. No longer working from the shadows, I had assembled a senior leadership team that shared my vision and values. Thomas Jenkins, restored to his position as COO, had become an invaluable mentor and ally. Rachel Goldman had joined our board of directors, bringing her sharp legal mind and ethical clarity to our governance. "The quarterly numbers are impressive," Thomas had noted during our most recent executive meeting, "especially the Community Development Division. That had been my father's dream, profitable projects that also created genuine social value. I had expanded that division significantly, focusing on affordable housing, mixed-use developments in neglected neighborhoods, and innovative sustainability initiatives. The industry had taken notice. Last month, I had been named Developer of the Year by Urban Vision magazine, with the citation specifically mentioning our ethical business practices and community-focused projects. I kept the award in my father's old study, my study, now next to a photograph of him breaking ground on his first major project. You were right, Dad, I often found myself saying to that photograph. About everything. Personally, the journey had been more complicated. The betrayal and public battle had left scars that were slow to heal. Trust didn't come easily to me anymore. I had thrown myself into work as a shield against loneliness until Maria had staged what amounted to an intervention. Your father did not save this company for you to work yourself to death, she had declared, physically blocking the door one Sunday when I tried to go to the office. Today you rest. You remember there is more to life. That forced day off had been the beginning of a gradual rebalancing. I started small weekend hikes in the nature preserve my father had helped establish, dinner with Jessica and her husband once a week, piano lessons I had abandoned in my teens. 6 months ago, I had met Dylan Crawford at a charity auction for the community arts center we supported. An architect specializing in sustainable design, he had approached me with thoughtful questions about adaptive reuse of historic buildings, a passion we discovered we shared. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the fortune hunting I had grown wary of. Last week, he had asked if he could help redesign parts of the estate to better serve its new community purpose, his eyes alight with creative possibilities. I'd like that, I had said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The sound of children's laughter brought me back to the present moment. Maria approached, carrying a tray with lemonade for our young visitors. Your father would be proud, she said, nodding toward the playground. Not just of the business, but of the woman you have become. I felt tears prick my eyes. I hope so, Maria. Sometimes I wonder if I've been too harsh, too unforgiving. Boundaries are not the same as punishment, she said wisely. You protected what was entrusted to you. There is no shame in that. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, I gathered with the children and their parents for a group photo in front of the estate. Once an imposing symbol of wealth and exclusivity, it was now becoming something new, a place of community, growth, and possibility. Later, after everyone had gone and the house had settled into evening quiet, I sat in the garden with a glass of wine, contemplating all that had happened and all that was still to come. The past could not be changed. My brothers had made their choices, and I had made mine. But the future was still unwritten. The legacy my father had entrusted to me was not just buildings and balance sheets, it was the responsibility to do something meaningful with the privilege I had been given. I thought about Michael's letter and our pending coffee meeting. I thought about the community center plans and Dylan's ideas for the East Wing renovation. I thought about the new scholarship program the foundation was launching next month. Small steps, all of them. But together, they were creating a path forward not just for the company, but for me. To new beginnings, I whispered, raising my glass to the stars above. And, for the first time in a very long time, I felt not just the weight of responsibility, but the lightness of possibility. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult family situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought with those we love. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes protecting your boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for your own well-being and growth. Thank you for listening to my journey.